Good evening, gentlemen.
Well
How you
done.
doing?
Evening.
So tonight we're going to talk about a subject that my dad brought up to me on a phone conversation. So why don't we go ahead and pull him in? There he is.
Hi.
Hello.
And we do apologize if there's an echo. Him and I are sharing the same table to make this happen.
Tried to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Really, we did.
It's better than what it was. So we have a father-son duo tonight, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we have these conversations that just sort of pop out of nowhere. And this one started last week with what is it that the young ladies want? And my thinking of, are you sure you can even have that? If you're a young lady and you'd like to find a guy to settle in with, but then you want to dictate the rules of how everything's going to work in the relationship, in and out. And I was sitting there going, oh, okay. So if one person, doesn't matter who it is the dictator, and the other one has to snap to whenever something's requested of them, or even sometimes it feels like you're being required to think a certain way. You're not even allowed to have your own thoughts, and you're certainly not allowed to have a disagreement. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds like the old version of slavery, the one called bond slavery, where there's a boss and the other in the relationship essentially just has to do whatever they're told. They have no say, they have no argument, and they don't get to put in their 2 cents worth.
And it's interesting if that's a woman though, and has a career, right? She has no problem. Usually it's a man that's her boss. She has no problem acting that way with her boss, who's a man.
Well, some of them do and some of them don't.
Oh, okay.
What in marriage? Go ahead, Fred.
I'm a boss. I run a small business, and my experience with this comes up. Well, I think the reason it popped in my head so fast is it comes up quickly in the employer-employee relationship. As an employee, are you essentially a slave? I mean, you've hired yourself out. Are you a bond slave? For 8 hours a day or whatever that is, you're supposed to do what the boss says. Now, my experience more and more is that that's not how it works. Some employees are way better than others, but it's almost always a negotiation about who's going to do what. But you move that into a male-female bond relationship, that's never going to work. There is no.
Well, Fred, I spent 25 years as an engineer in the office environment. Yeah, I went in, I was a bond slave. Yeah, the mentality resonates. I did my job for my boss. My boss dictated what was going on. And I still had my responsibilities when I went home at night because I had to pick them up the next day. And now I'm just a union truck driver. Okay. So I'm paid for when I'm on work, but I do my job and I go home, and there is a mentality. It's just different. I enjoy this because I have no responsibilities outside of work. I do acknowledge my boss when I'm there. And yeah, when he calls me and tells me what I need to do, I do it. I have no problem doing that. But it seems to me that, there's a mentality here that the husband should be the head of the wife. And so there has to be this element of being a bondservant. But it seems to me to be turned upside down because in our modern legal framework, in essence, the woman has all the power once the marriage happens to dictate the terms and what the husband needs to do. Otherwise, she'll lay down the hammer of calling in the cops for an abuse claim, divorcing, getting alimony from him, child support, taking the children away. And even if she doesn't realize that in her conscious brain, unconsciously, everybody knows what will happen. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I wasn't actually even carrying it as far as okay, I'm going to go get my legal, carrying it outside of the relationship to a legal requirement. But yeah, I agree. As soon as you do that, we're in a society of believe all women, men always wrong. So yeah, from as soon as it goes to there, and the men know it, and you live that way, knowing that could happen to you. I was encouraged to see this. There are folks out there who are pushing up on that, but it's tough to argue with it on the legal side. But even before you get there in the relationship, you're still in this mode of the woman says something you're supposed to do and just expects you to jump to and do it. I mean, right down to, all the memes about you didn't take the trash out and those.
So you're kind of around the church. So there's a phrase. It's kind of there's an abomination in the phrase "she wears the pants," right?
That's an abomination.
Yeah,
I agree.
So it's the idea that she's
yeah.
actually not. It's the idea of she's taking over the role of the man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the man always gets the last two words in. Yes, dear.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I can tell you how many churches try to tell people that advice. It's so terrible.
I don't even want to hear it anymore. I used to. I don't know why. For the longest time, I thought that was a ha-ha sort of benign phrase, but nah, not anymore. I'm like, no, that's not funny anymore. It's not even funny, because my experience has been that neither should have absolute power. And if it just becomes a power game, then the relationship is over. And going in assuming that that's how it's going to work, either one is not going to work long term. The only thing that works long term is cooperation. Life becomes a negotiation at some point if you're still just looking at it from a power point of view.
But Fred, I'm going to push back on you a little bit here, in a friendly way. Okay, you own a business and you're in charge. If you had a co-leader who is co-in charge, who could decide things and had equal authority to you, how could the business survive? Someone has to have authorities. There has to be one person. In my mind, that's the only thing that makes sense.
You are absolutely right. I think it was 6 years ago now I bought out my business partner precisely because of that. It didn't work. So I don't disagree with you at the core level there. Somebody has to have the final authority.
In the Bible, it talks about the man as being the head of the household, of men vested with authority and power. Now, also warns against being tyrannical and being bitter and all that stuff. Yes, but there's still a true rule and authority there, is there not?
Yes.
Very true. I mean, women are equal in dignity and worth
Right.
before God. Absolutely. But someone has to be in charge. And if you're in charge, yes, you have the authority, but you also have the responsibility. And if things go wrong, hey, who's responsible? The guy who made the decision. And as a business owner, Fred knows that. And yes, he can
Very well.
heavily rely on his right hand person, and that should be his wife in a
Mhm.
marriage.
Yeah.
I love that kind of dynamic. I mean, that's what makes things work for me as a man.
I don't think that a secular marriage works. And that's what I was describing. Just a power. We're going to divvy up the power. And who's boss? There's no reason in that context why one or the other should be the designated head, shall we say, the CEO.
Oh, yeah, because they presume egalitarianism. So, but there usually one ends up in power, the other one doesn't, just by virtue of the relationship. Even Dabney talked about, you probably know who Dabney is, Robert Louis Dabney talked about this in the 19th century when feminism and stuff was going around. He said this is going to create absolute chaos and generations of bastard children, and it'll be the ruin of Christian civilization in America, basically. Yeah, that kind of came true.
Well, yeah, it did. I see the only way to have you have to have another boss, and that's where we kind of we're establishing that you need another head that both people can look up to and say, I'm responsible to that. And in a secular marriage, you don't have that.
And okay, I know where you're going, so I'm going to ask you the question: who is that other boss?
That's God. I was kind of holding that.
I know.
Hey, sometimes you got to set them up, right?
Hey, he set himself up. And, then I just played into that. That's why we have such fun on this podcast.
Well, I've been around a couple trees. I've seen an awful lot of broken people and broken marriages. I've been an officer in church and had to deal with it. And I take a pretty mellow view of it now just because I have to. But you see what doesn't work really fast.
Well, you've seen a lot of it because I've seen a lot of it. It's just so very common. And pretty much everybody is broken to some extent, and we're working through our issues. And sometimes we don't work through them well, and they blow up and destroy our marriages and our relationships, and it's just common. So, okay, I'm no better, no worse than anybody else, but yeah, other people don't live a charmed existence either.
I don't know anybody who's got it easy. I know people who have a framework that makes it work. And I know a whole lot more who don't have a framework that will work. And they last in marriage, 7 years now? If that, on average.
Typically.
Yeah, and the averages are coming down as we go through it because it's just gotten so much easier to get out of a marriage. Mine was 2.5, my last one. My current one's 8. So we're right at that moment, right? I should start to get worried now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Fred brought up the secular marriage problem because I didn't realize that's what it was when I was getting into it because we met in the church. But all of her uh, views on marriage were very secular, as I would find out. You know, did the marriage counseling thing for a few weeks, then she bailed on that when the counselor suggested that maybe she had to do something, change something about herself,
Mm.
and of course, then that's when she decided that it was time to leave. So, but and I think a lot of guys don't find out until the accusations are made and the paperwork is filed that it really was a secular marriage.
Well, a lot of the women will, not so much the guys, but a lot of the women will keep on pretending that it never was a secular marriage, but they found it out. They like to think they found it out, and then they can there shame the men, right? And then still keep going on their holy roly journey while everybody in the church feels sorry for them and you go girl and all the other crap. So
See, my theory is that okay, everybody has this secular mindset because we spend more time outside in the world than in the church. And when a religious church woman divorces, it can be worse. I don't know the statistics, but she
Really?
is going to have to maintain her standing. So she will contrive church means, sinful accusations against a man to make him bad man, to vindicate herself, to keep her standing in the church, but rationalize things in her mind. Whereas a secular woman who has, buys into, well, it just didn't work out. She doesn't quite have the same incentive internally or externally to paint him so negatively. And Nick probably agrees. What do you think, Fred?
Yeah, I don't. My experience with this is in working with folks whose marriages are struggling, and I can't say there's one. I can't say there's a common thread in the ones I've worked with entirely on that subject. But yeah, I saw weak men and women who thought they were strong but weren't. If there was a thread that I saw, it was that.
So what you're saying is that women can't really lead a relationship, even if they think they can. And that, okay. So then the question would be, would that weakness, particularly in this modern girl boss era, lead them to think, well, I've got to find something to save face. I've got to find, because women are social creatures. They need that, that social validation. And we're seeing we don't have stats because they just don't break the stats down by church versus not church. But
Okay.
and this might not be happening in as much in the church that you're in. I know the church you're in, it's actually pretty solid, but
It's pretty stable. There's a lot of stable relationships in it. Yes.
right. But I think if you look at the larger statistics and the fact that divorce just kind of cuts straight across the church anymore, that
Boy, you're bringing up my other comment that I made in our conversation.
yes, I am.
What is the church? I have a pretty harsh definition of it. So if you show me a mega church with a health and wealth preacher, I don't even count it. That's not church to me. So if you're counting those folks in that number, you're not there. So what's left of the church in the United States? How many people actually go to a Bible believing church with leadership that works biblically with couples that might be struggling? Oh, you might be down around 5% of folks who go to church on Sunday. Where if your marriage is struggling, the leadership will come work with you. They won't even wait till you come to them. And then they're going to walk you through Ephesians 5 and 6. That's a pretty low number of churches these days.
Well, let me
And
throw
those make for
So
some
my-
tough conversations too, by the way.
You want to talk about church? I can give a definition real quick. You should recognize it. This Catholic Church hath been sometimes more, sometimes less visible. In particular, churches which are members thereof are more or less pure, according as the doctrine of the gospel is taught and embraced, ordinances administered, and public worship performed more or less purely in them.
Yeah, in the way you use the word Catholic there, it means universal, right?
Yeah.
Or not Catholic like me. It's Catholic like universal.
It's what I call
Okay,
small
there
c
are
Catholic.
two meanings to the word. But let me ask you guys this. Okay, I'm Catholic, and the three of you are Presbyterian.
Yeah.
So what do we have in common? Well, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, the Presbyterian Church has a liturgy.
Yes.
And okay, you start your worship with this, you move through
Mhm.
there's a structure there.
I would say
Whereas the churches, the health and wealth churches, yeah, not so much a liturgy. No, not really. So is that the distinction, Fred? There's a liturgy. I mean, there's other distinctions too.
I might take it deeper than that. Yeah. I have to think about that for a minute, because liturgy is important, but you can do that and still be off on the wrong path. When I grew up in the Episcopal Anglican Church, I mean, if you've never been to one, you'll recognize it as a Catholic service, just about. That's
Absolutely.
I
I attended a Anglican Youth Catholic Church in Houston. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably what you experienced when you were growing up. It was great.
I had to leave. They chased me off. I couldn't do it anymore. That was mid-90s. I could not do it. Locally here, what changed was our local diocesan bishop changed. The older guy had been holding a line, and then we got a new guy, and that was the end of that. And I was gone in 3 years after that.
So you were basically grew up high Anglican.
Yeah.
High church Anglican. Yeah, okay.
I did. I actually experienced all kinds of interesting things in the Anglican Episcopal Church, because there was a charismatic wave that moved through in the 80s. It was kind of fun, but it was never taken away. The liturgy was never taken away. And so it never strayed that far. And that, I think that little offshoot's still around, but I'm not going back down there, because the women got a hold of it. Did I say that?
Yeah,
You can say
Trouble.
that. You can say
No,
that.
that's interesting, because that's how like the Anabaptist, Antinomians, and Quakers kind of led into women getting a hold of that too. The convenient way for them to usurp and take power and be the preachers and pastors and all that stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had, and that, we were back to weak men, strong men. There was one very strong guy at the top, a local diocese is geographically here. It's maybe 150 churches. So there's one guy holding back a dam on, a fairly big, in the U.S. counties, and probably about 10, 15 counties in a state, and 150 Anglican churches, and boom, he retires and it's over. That's not really the issue for me. The issue is the pressure was there. There's like a giant wave dam behind it that just flooded in when one really tough guy is holding it back.
So kind of what you're saying is that we lost the men who had the character to protect the church, and we lost them due to natural causes, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Well, and the folks who understood why it mattered at the core.
Right.
And that's not that men are some, sinless folks who need to lord it over women. It's the women bring a different opinion to it. But I don't know. There are godly women who could probably do it, but that's not what appeared at our doorstep. These were women who wanted their first move was a sexual loosening. That's almost too easy of a word for what they did.
Okay. You said that there might be godly women out there who could do it, and that
Do
might
what?
be true.
Do what
have-
specifically?
I don't want to discount the possibility.
Right. Yeah. Discount that there are women who could have come in and
Okay.
kept the church moving forward more or less intact. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. But isn't this a little bit like the people that you want in power, like you want to vote for, are the people who are never going to run? Like
That was very much the case.
And in this particular case, if a godly woman reading the Bible is going to read the part that says women are not supposed to lead men. Nick can quote that, where that actually comes from. But
2 places. Yeah.
right. So
1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy chapter 2.
Okay. So in those cases, would a godly woman ever actually stand up and do that?
No.
Okay. So maybe there are women out there who could have done it, but they were counting on the men to continue holding back the dam.
Yeah, I know. I have a mental picture of what those ladies looked like because I was around a lot of them.
Well,
What was
so
that?
it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't really matter. Any woman. Okay, I'm going to take this to the next level. Any woman who wants to take the lead, by virtue of wanting to take the lead, is not qualified to take the lead, because the women qualified to take the lead are being obedient to God and God's message, which says, no, don't take the lead. It's not your role. So basically, the obvious conclusion from this logic is any woman who is asserting herself is not worthy of listening to. Correct me if I'm wrong.
There weren't enough stools around, were they? You know what I'm referring to. Jenny was it Jenny Geddes? Yeah, threw the stool in Edinburgh, right? At the minster. Yeah. Was it the act of, I think it was like the act of uniformity or something they tried to pass in Scotland, and she threw a stool at the minister that had the prayers, the imposed prayers. Yeah.
Yes. And that can get tedious. I still look at it, and it's been the times that it was most obvious to me was when I was working with troubled couples, that the most important thing in marriage is humility. And it may be said in life, because you can be humble and still a strong leader. And that's both. That's equal. That's not a gender thing at all. That's like, are you humble enough to let the relationship work out? I don't know how I want to say this, but not just take yourself out of the equation and not demand anything, but are you humble enough to sit there and listen to yourself and say, that's not going to work, and then go back to your partner and go, let's make this work.
So it's funny you bring that up.
I'm not sure I'm saying that very well, but
Well, here, let me give you an example. Occasionally, now Elena and I, we don't have very many fights, but when we do, we will go at it for a while because y'all are disagreeing and hashing something out, and that's fine. Very rarely do our voices go elevated, but at some point, one of us is going to start laughing. Because we recognize that, and usually the person who starts laughing is the one who recognized that they actually stepped in it with the fight. And that's an example of this, but you have to have the humility to recognize that you were actually wrong. And that can be either of us. Right?
I
think
want to build on this. Humility is so important. Two men, friends, either, your friends, your equals, or it's a boss employee relationship. You know what builds respect between two men? Yeah, they get at odds at times. Two friends do. Boss, employee do. And if the boss can admit he's wrong, or if a friend can admit he's wrong, or the employee can admit he's wrong, that's an act of humility. And it actually raises your respect for a person who is willing to admit he's wrong. And okay, now a husband-wife relationship, you know what? The husband is not always right. He's willing to admit, he needs to admit he's wrong and have the humility to do that. And, a wife should be able to admit she's wrong and have the humility to do that. And my observation experience is that oftentimes a wife is not willing to admit she was wrong. She will just
Bingo.
keep arguing, and that leads to strife. Because as a man, maybe it comes with maturity, but the older I get, I realize, I'm wrong. I'll admit to it. It doesn't affect my sense of self-worth. And you know what? I just have to own up to it, and then life goes on.
But with the same
But
women that don't want to
humility
admit
is
they're
so
wrong,
important.
but with the same women that don't want to admit they're wrong, they want to force the man to admit he's wrong even when he's not. A lot of the time. So
I see that sometimes. But I also see, if that's the case, I also see that they won't submit to anybody, anything, and they won't submit to God. And that's where it starts. If you can submit there, then you can figure out how to submit somewhere else.
Can a person, man or woman, submit to God if they lack the virtue of humility?
Yeah.
I don't think they can. It requires humility to be able to submit to anybody. And I do wonder sometimes if, because we teach humility is weakness in the modern culture, that that people are starting, because you can see this stepping aside from the church, you see this in how people take advantage of, like, business and salespeople take advantage of other people. You can see it in how just this unwillingness in even secular disagreements, like let's say among streamers, because streamers love beefing with each other, right? a little bit of humility, and the term I used when I discussed this was graciousness, right? It's just to say, we might have a misunderstanding here. Can we just walk it back? Discuss this offline, take it out of the public space and work it out like men. And I see so many men, particularly these days, who refuse to do that. And I'm not sure how you're expecting to have a successful marriage as a man if you can't admit to, in secular environments,
Right.
that you might have screwed up on this one. Like, I can do it with my wife, and I can do it with men, but the man has to be willing to have that reciprocity.
It all
Well-
starts there, because if you can't admit you're wrong, or at least say, hey, we're not working, this isn't working, this little argument isn't working, and neither one of us are, we both think we're right and we're not getting anywhere, and the graciousness to just say, okay, well, let's just table it, we still like each other today,
We can still work together.
we can still work together. Yeah, that happens sometimes. And so you're like, you just have to deal, instead of saying, I have my rights, I'm right, what I want is you have to do it. We're back to the slavery issue at that point.
Well, there's two ways you can live life. You can live life in an environment where people respect each other enough to say, you know what, we need to table this, or whatever the solution is. Or you're forced to go down a strict, hyper-controlled hierarchy, like, say, I don't know, Soviet Russia, comrade, or it ends up looking like the military almost, because it's the only way to build trust without humility is to enforce rules and expectations in a strict hierarchy.
That won't work. Not for very
I
long.
didn't say it would work. I just said that's the only way to do it if you don't have humility.
Everybody
just-
immediately starts looking for a way out as soon as you try to.
Let me ask a
Put that
very
structure together.
controversial question to Fred.
It doesn't work
As
in an
Christians.
employee-employer relationship either. Far
Okay,
and away, our
but as-
best
Go ahead.
employees. I don't have the volume up. Our far and away, my best employees are the ones that we just work. It's a collaboration all the time, and
Sure.
you feel, and that's how you feel it when you're working with them. It's like, what are you doing right now? Okay, I'm working on this. That's next. Okay, you need a push and a help here. No problem. Far and away the easiest, and that's what I look for. They're not super common.
That is very true. But those same employees also understand who's the boss. They're
Oh, yeah.
not fighting that. They are working with and for the boss. Okay, it doesn't have to be adversarial. But at the same time, St. Paul says, and I don't know the Bible verses here, that basically we are a bondservant to Christ. That doesn't mean he's a tyrant over us. But the whole theme of this show is, sophistry, where somehow the path we're on leads to being a bondservant. And my take on that is it could be a benevolent bondservant where we acknowledge who our leader is, or it could be tyrannical. So I'm just throwing that out there to see what Fred says about that. Because this bondservant, I think, is somewhat essential, but it doesn't need to be tyrannical.
We're
Is
talking
it
about in the
even
workplace,
necessary?
correct? Are we talking about in the workplace?
Workplace? No, primarily marriage.
No, I wouldn't call it that
Is
because there already is a servant class in the household codes. I would not
Yeah,
call it that.
I agree, and I wouldn't go there either. I was going back
okay,
when I
well,
started.
that's why I'm asking the question
Yeah,
to get
sure.
some pushback so we can flesh this out. I'm not proposing anything. I want to hear.
The old bondservant, and this is, I mean, you could get down a deep rabbit hole in the history of slavery, but the old traditional bondservant of 2,000 years ago was generally somebody who got themselves in debt to the family, and there was no way they were going to pay it back. And so they essentially wrote a contract that said, I will work for you for X amount of time, and I will be your bondservant. That's what it meant. I am in debt to you. And so when you get into the biblical writings and the analogy that the writers were using, it was, you are a bondservant to Christ because you were in debt to him, a debt you can never pay. But you have a benevolent dictator who doesn't hold that against you. But that's my understanding of the biblical meaning of bondservant. But the bondservant that they were talking about, if you read it in the Bible, or even they'll translate it slave, it was not what we call a chattel slave where you were owned. It was a contract.
And
Yeah.
wasn't the contract forgiven at the Jubilee, if I recall correctly?
That depended, but yeah,
Okay.
that depended on whether that was, you're talking Old Testament.
Yeah, Old Testament stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, those.
Okay,
You can
well,
go back and look up the rules for the
in Ephesians
whether the
5,
bonds were done out or not, whether they ended. But
in Ephesians 5, it says the husband is head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So if the analogy is that we are in some fashion bondservants to Christ, is not the wife in some fashion a bondservant to the husband? Okay, I want to flesh this idea out.
I would say it's an improper carryover of an analogy. I'm not saying there's not a similar structure, but it's not the same. So
yeah,
a wife has certain rights, even under the Old Testament, New Testament, under household codes that bondservants would not have, and children did not
right.
have. They were cherished. They were to be cherished. They were not over the. They were what do you call second? They're the vice regent or lieutenant of the husband over the family. So when he was gone, she was in charge.
Hmm.
So they weren't bond servants in that sense. They did have a certain authority, but they were also subordinated. So literally means ordered under, means hierarchically they were ordered under the husband, but they are exalted over the rest of the household.
Yeah, I would never use the term bondservant to describe a wife or a child.
Well, thanks, guys.
Okay.
That's why I'm asking these hard questions.
Yes. Well, I want to
so
make
we
sure
can
that's out
flesh
there
them
because
out. I'm not proposing these. You understand? I just want to clearly say I'm not proposing these as what should be, and I'm not advocating them. But we do need to flesh out these things.
you do. Because others could hear it and go, oh, you guys are proposing slavery. That's never it. It is not even
No.
close to that. So we want to make sure that we get that said. This is never a slavery relationship. And that's where we started with one of the principals thinking that maybe they were the boss at that level of essentially you have to do what I say.
You know what? I think getting back to our modern age. It kind of is the problem with modern marriage because it's not religious marriage, it's secular marriage.
Mhm.
And you don't, a man doesn't realize how much how powerless he is until divorce.
Yep.
And she can take the
Absolutely.
children and they
Yeah.
will award her the children and they
Yeah,
will
that
award
happens.
her child support and they
Mhm.
will, in many cases, award her spousal support. And they will
Sometimes.
believe her when she says he's a bad man and invent the reason. He's abusive.
Right.
He's got these inclinations. He's whatever. And so at that point, the man realizes, damn, I don't have any authority. I never had any authority. Once I got married, I lost my authority. I didn't realize it, but
Yeah.
now it becomes apparent. So, is modern marriage bond servitude of the man to the woman, even though no one recognizes it or no one acknowledges it?
I don't know if it is or it isn't categorically, but it can certainly feel that way. And that's the folks I've talked to.
According to practice, but maybe not not written on paper, but according to practice and experience. Yeah. So that's interesting because the church they have this thing about servant leadership. They treat the man of having all the responsibility, but with zero authority. I think it's Rollo Tomasi in the Red Pill. He said, Red Pill Space. He says that is all the responsibility and no authority is slavery.
I'd have to chew on that.
Well, okay, let's think about that a little bit. If you're telling me that I'm responsible for paying all the bills, okay, but I don't get to decide. So let's say I'm responsible for paying the credit card bill as the guy, and I am. But if you decide that you're going to go put $2,000 on that credit card for a hair appointment, nail appointment, some clothes, etc., and you didn't tell me about it, and I look at you and I go, so am I supposed to pay the credit card bill or the rent bill this month? And you look at me and you go, I don't care, figure it out. Because I wanted these things. And your job is, as the responsible man, is to make it work. Isn't that kind of a form of slavery? It's an implied form, I'll grant that.
Or like you could say for my instance, I was even a pastor of an Orthodox Presbyterian church, and the wife would continuously refuse obedience, and then the response of the church was, "You're just not loving enough. You just need to, sacrifice more, serve more, basically obey her." And she's not responsible, she's not responsible to obey you.
That's not
Well, that happened in
gonna
PCA too, by the way.
work.
But this is your typical PCA, this is your typical Presbyterian evangelical church, right? Where they're complementary, man's the head of the household, right? Except the women always end up wearing the pants
Well,
because
Nick, didn't we go back and find the line in the Danvers statement where they're latching on to say this? Because there's one line in there.
I think so. I think I've read it.
Yeah, and I can't remember where it is, but the wording on it is so mealy mouthed that you can put whatever you want in there, and that's what ended up happening. And I think, Nick, that's what you're getting at, where you say, well, maybe it's not written down, but
No,
in
that's how it is
effect.
in practice. Yeah.
And so my dad's not divorced, but I have been, and I tell you right now, it hits different. Some of the stuff it moves from the theoretical world to the practical world when you're with the counselor hashing it all out. But in my case, the first 3 sessions were she had a list of demands, things that she wanted me to help with. I was supposed to do this, I needed to, and one of them was to go find a different job that made more money, which I actually did. Which I actually did a few months after she left, which was hysterical.
Go after me.
So, but she had that list, and what was fascinating to me is in the 4th session, she finally vented her list. In the 4th session, the counselor looks to me and goes, "So, okay, what could you use help with?" Because that's what we were working on. What could you use help with? And honestly, I said, I've got so much work that I need to do. I need to be, left. I need lots of time. My job is a high brain activity job. I need time to think and be left alone. And
Hey,
boom, that was it. We were done.
don't the marriage vows cover this? For better,
Yeah.
for worse, for richer, for poorer? So, oh no, you need to go get a better, more high-paying job. Hey, didn't she already sign up to live with you, regardless of how much money you're gonna make?
Yeah, I got a story for this just yesterday in our business coaching group. There's like 20 guys, 20 business owners in the same business in this group, and one of them was dealing with an employee who was being frustrating and kind of asking for more money. His mealy mouth, they couldn't really tell. And then they were talking about, well, his wife does this and that, and I was like, hmm. And then there was this, well, just offer him incentives and different practical ideas. And then I said, you're not negotiating with the CEO, so you're not going to get anywhere. The wife is the CEO. So the only way you're going to work this problem out is if you can get her on board with his job. Other than that, forget it. And so, just another practical story of who is boss when it comes right down to it. I think she was manipulating him. She had high wants and needs with a husband who was like doing pretty well, but he's not gonna, it's not gonna be a 6 figures guy.
Well, and most guys aren't. The median salary in the United States is $70,000 a year. And women, if you're listening out there, that's the math. Math don't care about your feelings and wants. If you're an average woman, you're going to get an average guy with an average salary. Sorry, that's the math.
Here's the truth. Most men do not have the capability of earning much more than that. Because that's just where they're going to be. And you know what? Even some men who do have the capability of doing more just choose not to, because I just don't have the fire in my belly to do that. And I'd rather just work and make 70, 80, 90 grand and have a content life than to strive for that excellence. You cannot expect every man to go to that level.
Very few will. And most of them are broken enough in certain ways that even if they wanted to, they can't do it without a major rebuild.
Well, I think we brought this up on an earlier show. The world is about 4% sociopaths, but if you look at CEOs, there's like 20 or 30% sociopaths. Okay, So, ladies, you want that CEO guy at pulling the 8-9 figures? Are you prepared to live with a sociopath? Because statistically, throw a rock, you're going to hit one.
Well, even if they aren't a straight up sociopath, that guy is tough and gets what he wants out of employees. And it's going to be difficult to impossible for him to just flip the giant switch when he gets home and go, oh, I am now the humble husband. There are ones that do it, and I really appreciate those, but they're rare. I look for those for examples.
But
that can
those
do that.
guys,
Most of those are already doing that with their employees too. So
those guys who are own their business, or are high performers, go up to the C-suite or whatever, move up to 150, 200, 250,000. To climb that ladder, you can't do it doing 40 hours a week. You
Nope.
probably can't do it at 60 hours a week. You got to be living, breathing, spending a lot of time at that job. Now, if you're going to do that, you're not home. Your wife has to take a back seat to that. And she's not going to be getting the attention that she thinks a lot of women need. So if you want that kind of man, you're not going to have that kind of man at home very often. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can either have a man who's home a lot and reasonable amount of time.
So,
or you can have that man who's so fucking focused that he's going to make the high money, but then he's not going to be there for you.
So Jordan Peterson actually wrote about this in one of his books, and they actually have data on this. To achieve that $250,000 a year job is an 80-hour work week. It's 2 work weeks stuck together every week. You want to be a CEO? You basically work while you're awake.
That explains my childhood. Okay.
And this is the study data. I don't know which study it was, but they have a lot of this data for the stuff. And so few people are willing to actually do that amount of work. Look, even I mean, I work about 80 to 90 hours a week, but even I gotta have a break. I like to read, but I've got to switch gears because I'm not a guy. I admit I am not a guy who's going to run a Fortune 500 company.
Well, let's break this down. Okay, minimum 12 hours a day for 5 days a week. That's 60 hours.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're not going to work 12 hours on Saturday. Only 10. That's 70 hours. Sunday, you're only going to work 6 hours.
Yep. Just
So,
going to say that.
yeah, you're going to do it in 76 hours a week. Okay. Maybe 74. Whoa, okay. Nick, what did your dad work when you were growing up?
It was sporadic, but generally a good work. It was great if he could do 5 days, but it's usually at least 6 days a week. And I remember about half the time I'd go to bed around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. He didn't even come home yet. But yeah, so he probably worked anywhere between 60 and 80 hours a week, just depending on how busy he was. Some I didn't see him sometimes all week, sometimes. So yes.
So I'm going to talk about my childhood a little bit because my dad's sitting right here, and I grew up, and he's owned the same business for as long as I've been alive.
Yeah.
So I know what it was like, and there were times when he would come home. In fact, this early on in when I was a particularly young child, he'd come home and it was, I've got to catch up on the paperwork for the day. I've got to write checks. I've got to, And my mom helped him with all of this. She's she's actually running a lot of the money math behind the scenes, but he's got to sign them. He's got to, read the contracts for the rent, right? He's got all the stuff he's got to do, or he needs to manage the inventory in the computer system. We did a lot of work with the computer system in the 90s because we were just getting it set up. So in fact, I vaguely recall you had your first computer network splayed across our living room floor.
I did.
Right.
I did. I had it splayed out, and I had both computers up and running, and I was inputting data into a database at home all weekend. I remember that. I don't know if you knew. I didn't know you remember that. It's never ending. The other thing that I'd spent an awful lot of time doing was learning my craft. I mean, you would think that I would know what I was doing. I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree, and that was gonna, but no, that's a license to learn. You had way more to learn, and you always felt like you were behind, especially when I was in my 20s and 30s. In fact, I didn't really get out of that until I did a whole bunch of work to develop classes to teach it, and then all of a sudden it all clicks in and you don't have to study as much. But yeah, it was a long haul, and my wife did complain about my hours, and rightly so. But I could have quit the business and gone to a 9-to-5 job at some point, probably, and that would have probably solved some of it. But
it would have solved some of it, but I'm glad you didn't personally, because the existence of my career would not have happened if you had done that. I would have had to go somewhere else, do something else.
Oh, me too.
But
Me too. I would not have had the connections or the
yeah,
introduction to do what I'm doing right now after I lost my pastoral ministry due to family
right.
divorce. Yeah.
So, it's like, yes, you could have done that. I'm grateful you didn't. And even today, the fact that you didn't, the fact that you still own this business, that you can still provide jobs for other men. We are an entirely male business, which is actually pretty common for the industry we're in. It to me, and I have seen the stress that has put you through, particularly over the past few years with the coof and all of that. But I mean, personally, I'm very grateful you stuck with it. I know my wife is grateful you stuck with it. And honestly, I think mom is grateful you stuck with it, because even though you weren't around, I think we had a better life for it.
Okay.
Well, let me
Well, I
point
never
out
tried to
something.
be anything but steady on. Just keep moving. Some days that didn't feel so great, but
A
just
man
keep
needs to
moving.
do what his mission is. Now, it's not a bad decision in that state to say, you know what, I don't want to do all this. I'm going to move back to a 9-to-5 job
Hmm.
to prioritize other things. That's a good decision. It's also a good decision to say, you know what, I'm going to stick with this. We're not here to tell man which decision they should make. That's up to the individual.
I let the Holy Spirit be my guide,
Right.
and I never got a call to go do something else. I had hobbies I wanted to do, but I never got a call that said, "Oh no, you've got to go do something else for your career." I call it my wake up thoughts, but I don't know. That's whatever I wake up to is what I'm essentially being told to do. And I get those a lot. I don't know about other folks, but that's me. It's like, oh, that all crystallized. That's the direction you need to move. But I never got one of those wake up thoughts or about doing a different business. I mean, we started out with 3 partners, and I ended up with it. And I'm still friends with one of the partners and not the other. Okay, fine. There's nothing I could do about that. That was a divorce. It was a nasty divorce. The last one. I know what divorce feels like because I did that with a business partner.
I wasn't saying that you were the one who, you were a guy who hasn't gone through a divorce. I was around for that. That was brutal.
Yeah.
I think you got most of your gray hair that year.
Yeah, probably.
And that's where mine came from.
Yeah, I just don't have any hair anymore.
No. Well, so where were we?
Yeah, we did get kind of sidetracked there.
Yeah.
Well, have we run out the bond slave? Or do we need to go back to that? Because I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we are not promoting slavery in marriage. In fact, that's why
No.
we started out arguing against it.
Yeah.
And that there are some, but it's unfortunate, but there are always folks who are going to want to move that way, and they need a conversation about why that's not okay.
Well, okay. Then, so we're establishing that we don't agree that slavery is a good idea. Question: why do you think people are so interested in trying to push their relationships that way?
I fear that the other folks will not take care of me properly. How far off is that?
To the group?
To the group, yeah.
Okay, my answer is men pushing that on women are believing in the lack of agency of a woman, so they're promoting the necessity of controlling them.
Okay.
So Steve, you're saying that people that advocate for of complete male responsibility are trying to say that women have no agency, and that
that's something, that's really the concept you brought up, and I'm just seeing that kind of showing up all over the place. This lack, this belief that women don't have agency either means I get to go and sleep with a whole bunch of women because they're just dumb 304s, and they don't know any better. Or if I marry one, I have to control her because she's not smart enough to control her own life. Therefore, I have to do it, and I'm justified in doing it. Or, you know what? I am a Christ-pilled guy that I believe women should be this way, and I want to believe that, and just go off in la la land, and they're all sugar and spice. And if I do what I should do, they're just going to behave and never divorce me and all this. Isn't the common thread aspects or different ways of looking at the belief of the lack of agency of women?
I don't know so much a belief is as my dad said, it's more of a fear, and it's just manifesting different ways. I'm afraid that she'll leave me, so I'm either going to try and control her, or I'm going to give her everything she wants. And because women can leave at the drop of a hat for any reason, thank you, no fault divorce, then the threat is real. And 50% divorce rate, guys are aware. We all know somebody who's been divorced, even if we don't know what the stat is. So is this I think what Steve, what you're trying to say is that this is all, it's all coming from the same place in men, and we're just trying to go about controlling women in different ways.
I don't know how many men actually try to control women.
Yeah, I don't
I
think
don't
that's
know.
the common one.
I don't think it's the higher percentage who actually
I
want power.
I don't think so either. I'm
I
just
think they
saying,
want peace first.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, men don't really want to control women. It's too much work. But I think this lack of agency, this belief in lack of agency, manifests in different ways.
Yeah, like the church
And so
not
it's kind of
disciplining
a
women.
fantasy to think that if I do everything right, it'll turn out
Yeah.
right.
It doesn't work that
And
way.
she doesn't really have a say in it. So it's kind of a delusion.
Mm.
And then when she does have a say and she divorces you, it's like, whoa, why did that happen?
Well, Nick, got a question for you.
Sure.
Does the Bible ever say that if I do X, Y, and Z, I can expect a outcome, a specific outcome?
Yeah, if you sin against God and don't repent, you can expect to go to hell.
Oh, okay. Okay. You got me. You got me. Okay. Temporally, if I'm working with another human, he got me. If I'm working with another human, are humans robots that I do X, Y, and Z and I
No,
get
they're
it?
not.
Okay.
No, that's why you have contracts and ways to enforce those contracts. Because you have to have the contract because you know that you're dealing with a sinful person on the other end who, without enforcement of that contract, will not do it. And due to their agency, you have agency, so they're gonna do something else instead of adhering to what they should do. Like that's why you have vows, and both parties make a vow.
Oh, so the marriage is a covenantal contract then. Is that what you're
Right.
saying?
Yeah. There's a structure, there's a law, there's, it's done under God, usually with witnesses, and there's parties that should hold them accountable to that contract and covenant. So it's not merely a contract, it's more than that. But yeah. So covenant is more than a contract. It is a contract, but more so.
Well, getting back to that, in essence, does a contract convey rights or is it primarily obligations?
A contract is usually obligations in the legal sense. I will trade this obligation for that one. Maybe that's work versus money or whatever, but it is.
Right. This is philosophical. Yeah, you can say, I got the right to this performance from you. But on the other side, it's an obligation for them to perform it. And on your side, you have the obligation to do such and such in the contract. Just like in marriage. When you make the oath or contract, you have obligations. There is no guarantee that the other party is going to perform. They're assuming their obligations, and you hope that if both sides perform their obligations, it will work. But you can't take that. You can't take it to the bank that you have the right to a certain performance from them. That's taking it to the next level. And it doesn't often work that way.
Is a contract is a voluntary contract between two people, and you can include marriage in this. once you're under that contract, you have your list of obligations. But you did voluntarily enter into it. So a marriage is not a bond servant contract,
No.
right? In a bond servant contract, it's like, I have no other way to pay the debt, so I have to do this. But in a marriage, quote unquote, contract, no, two people are voluntary. It's no different than signing a 1099 contract for employment. They're the same thing. So again, we're
I'm
not
familiar with those.
advocating. Right. Yet again, we're not advocating for, trying to say that marriage is slavery if we think that's horrific. But that doesn't disobligate you from what the contract is. I still have to do what the contract says I have to do.
But the obligation is to yourself and to God. And then only after that, the obligation is to the other person. Or maybe a better way to say it is, you oblige yourself under God's authority to do that, to perform for the other person the obligation. But it's first binding upon yourself.
I like that.
That's back to the humility idea we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Very true.
Well, have we beat this concept to a dead pulp?
Yeah, I don't know that we've reached any profound conclusions, but we've talked about a lot of things. And I enjoy these types of conversations because it gives me a lot to think about, and hopefully gives our listeners a lot to think about too.
I'm not claiming I have all the answers. I'll tell you that. I made my
I'm
mistake.
also going to say that, yeah. So it's not a bondservant, but the woman has a blessed place subordinate to her husband in the Holy Scripture. They're one flesh relationship. God makes them one flesh. They physically have the sacrament-ish of one flesh. It's not really a sacrament, but it's similar to one. The marital sacrament or act, made of. So she's of man, for man, and man also is not independent of woman because he's born of woman. And there's the analogy of Christ and the church, but you can also see it with God and Israel, even in the Old Testament. And then the commandments, you're to honor mother and father, not just father only. So both are to be of honored place in the household. Both have souls, both are in need of redemption through Christ, right? Not just the man. And so, yeah, I mean, women are great. Women are amazing. The female sex is amazing in its proper nature and place. Same thing with the man. The man should not, become a woman. Man's place is great as it is, but when he tries to take the place of a woman, hey, he can't really do it, right? And it's something to look down upon. It's called being effeminate. The same thing with a woman. She can't really be a man. It's not everything he can do, she can do better. I'm sorry, the song's dead wrong. We saw that with the recent thing that happened over the past weekend, right? Where the man was covering the former president, and the females were ducking for themselves and couldn't get their guns holstered.
It appears so.
That's what it appears. So,
Well, it's time to acknowledge that there are differences. And hey, maybe you can celebrate those differences a little
are
bit.
good differences.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I try to tell women when they don't believe me, but when I'm counseling them, I try to tell them, you have no idea how much power you have without exercising any at all, just by your natural God-given attraction. And you don't need anything more than that. But I haven't found one yet that really truly understood that when I tried to explain it.
Oh man, we could open
That's
up.
another conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation that we don't have time for tonight, unfortunately. I think you're right, but I'll just say this: the feminist mindset abhors that idea.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Wrap it up here. So, any final words from the panel here?
I've said my piece. I'm good.
Nothing from me.
Right.
All
I'm
right.
good.
So, what do we have next week, guys? I know that Nick, you've got something for Wednesday.
What is love?
Baby, don't
I'm
hurt
doing
me.
Monday, but I don't have a
Exactly.
topic yet.
Okay, so we will have to fill y'all in for what Monday is going to be. All right. Well,
Okay.
yeah. Thanks for listening in with us. This conversation went a bunch of ways I didn't think it would go, but that's actually good. And hopefully people don't clip this to hell. But I actually, Steve, you were saying that you didn't think we covered a lot. I think we actually did. I just don't think it was sort of like intentionally profound thought, but I think fleshing out the roles of men and women and the danger of that sort of servant mentality, I think was actually a key point for today. So I'm glad we did get there. And with that, we'll see y'all next week.
Here.
Bye.